You ever get the feeling that someone's already decided who you are before you even open your mouth? That was the thought running through my mind as the emergency room lights blurred above me, cold, sterile, and indifferent. My breathing was shallow, erratic. The pain had started somewhere deep in my back, sharp and sudden like a blade sliding between my ribs. But what hurt worse than the physical pain was what came next. Before we go further, let me say this. This story is a fictional retelling inspired by real-world injustices that too many people of color face every day. You're watching Underrated Black Voices, the channel where we transform silence into strength and shame into justice. If this is your first time here, consider staying with us till the end. Now back to the worst night of my life. I was 8 months pregnant. We were at a charity gala. Black tie, polished floors, and expensive wine swirling in gold-rimmed glasses. I was dressed in a flowing navy gown, my baby bump proudly outlined beneath a silk sash. My husband was across the ballroom, deep in conversation with city officials. It was supposed to be a good night. Rare night. Until the pain hit. I don't even remember falling. One minute I was smiling politely to a woman who looked surprised I'd been invited. The next I was gripping the edge of the dessert table, gasping. They rushed me here. St. Calhoun Memorial Hospital. The prestigious kind of place where people drop names before symptoms. Where the parking lot has more Teslas than ambulances. The nurse barely looked at me when we arrived. The check-in desk was a wall of cold plexiglass and colder stares. I clutched my stomach, wincing, trying to explain that something wasn't right. That it felt like my baby was twisting, struggling, screaming without sound. "Sit," she said, eyes flicking up and down like I was a stray mutt off the street. "Someone will see you." That someone turned out to be a tall white man with salt and pepper hair and a stethoscope that looked like it had never touched struggle. Dr. Monroe. I'll never forget that name. He didn't ask how long I'd been in pain. Didn't ask about movement or bleeding or history. He looked at my clothes, then at my face. And something shifted in his posture, just slightly, but enough to make my throat go dry. "You here alone?" he asked, flipping through a clipboard without interest. "My husband is on his way," I managed, my voice barely steady. He scoffed, not looking up. Of course. That was the first sting. Not the pain in my belly. Not the knot in my spine. But that tone. That implication. That judgment. Then he leaned over slightly, just enough for only me to hear, and muttered under his breath. "People like you always turn a hangnail into a crisis. Can't pay for anything, but always want first-class service." I blinked. Did he just say that? My breath hitched. I tried to speak. Tried to remind myself to stay calm, stay focused, for the baby's sake. But my chest tightened with a heat that had nothing to do with contractions. "Excuse me," I whispered. But he didn't repeat it. He just walked off toward the nurses, shaking his head, loud enough for the room to hear. Society's burden, always making noise. Heads turned. Eyes darted toward me. A black pregnant woman in pain, standing alone in a designer gown now stained with sweat, being dismissed like a drunk partygoer faking it for attention. One nurse giggled quietly. Another avoided eye contact. I looked around the emergency lobby, my hand gripping the edge of the chair to steady myself. My vision blurred, not from the pain but from the shame. I wanted to disappear. And yet I couldn't afford to break down. Not when my baby's life depended on staying focused. I took a slow breath, rubbed my stomach, and tried to summon the strength to stand. But my knees buckled again. Called out. Loud enough this time. "Please. Think something is wrong. I'm not just. We're not a charity," Dr. Monroe cut in sharply. He'd turned back, louder now, as if to prove a point. "We have real emergencies here." That did it. The whole room was looking now. Whispers followed me like a swarm. I could feel the shame crawling across my skin. I was 8 months pregnant, clutching my belly and begging for help, and this man was treating me like a liar. Parasite. Like I was somehow stealing care by simply needing it. I should have screamed. I should have cursed. But all I could do was cry. And then, The sliding doors of the ER burst open. There was a stillness that fell over the room like a sudden storm. A step, rest, firm, measured, and then I saw him, my husband, in full tactical field gear, badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. His face unreadable, but his eyes locked on mine. And behind him, 2 agents, a hospital administrator, and a woman I recognized from the mayor's office. Dr. Monroe turned, and his face paled like a man seeing his own ghost, because he knew exactly who my husband was. I had never seen that look on my husband's face before. I'm always focused, absolutely. But this was different. His steps were precise, but there was fire behind every move. Not rage, not panic, just the sheer force of someone who had been trained to dismantle entire systems with a single glance. He didn't say a word at first. He didn't have to. The badge on his chest did all the speaking. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Marcus D. Evans. Every eye in the lobby followed him like a ripple through still water. The gossiping nurse froze mid-whisper. The receptionist sat up straighter. A young man in scrubs dropped the clipboard he was holding. Dr. Monroe, suddenly very still, adjusted his coat with the jerky motion of a man trying to look composed while silently panicking. "Where is my wife?" Marcus's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Controlled, low, but carrying the weight of someone used to issuing commands during hostage situations. My hand went up instinctively, weakly. "Marcus!" In a blink, he was beside me, kneeling, one hand gently on my cheek, the other on my stomach, eyes darting over me like he was scanning for wounds. "Are you hurt?" he asked, but his voice cracked on that last word. Just barely. Just enough for me to realize that even under all that armor, he was terrified. I don't know. The pain started at the gala. It's been getting worse. I begged for help, but my voice trailed off as my eyes flicked toward Dr. Monroe. Marcus followed my gaze. "You begged," he repeated slowly. Then, standing up like a drawn sword, he turned to the doctor and said with chilling composure, "And you refused her care?" Dr. Monroe opened his mouth, but whatever explanation he had choked in his throat. "I wasn't given the full context," he stammered. "She didn't appear to be in." "In what?" Marcus snapped, stepping forward, forcing the doctor to stumble back a pace. "Didn't appear to be in what exactly?" "I didn't know she was You didn't know she was human." Marcus interrupted, voice rising. "You didn't know she was 8 months pregnant and in visible distress? Or you just didn't care because of the color of her skin?" The words landed like gunshots. Sharp, direct, unapologetic. Whispers exploded in the lobby again, this time laced with guilt instead of judgment. Phones started recording. One nurse covered her mouth. A security guard stepped forward but stopped cold when he saw the agents flanking Marcus, now standing silently at attention. "This woman," Marcus continued, voice shaking now with restrained fury, "has stood beside me through bomb threats, through violent protests, through cases that nearly killed me. She built a home while I chased monsters. And tonight, when she needed help, real immediate medical help, you treated her like a statistic. I deeply regret." "You should." I had never seen Dr. Monroe so small. Not in stature but in soul. Everything arrogant and towering about him earlier had withered under the weight of truth. The hospital administrator stepped forward nervously. She was a petite woman in a gray suit, clutching a folder to her chest. "Special Agent Evans, we had no idea this situation had escalated. Please know this is not reflective of St. Calhoun's standards. We are initiating an internal review immediately." Marcus didn't even turn to her. His eyes were still locked on Dr. Monroe. "You're lucky I'm not treating this as a civil rights violation." "Sir," she tried again, "we are deeply sorry. We will ensure." Marcus finally turned. "Ensure what?" "That your doctors learn to see black women as patients instead of problems. That they don't assume welfare case. just because a woman walks in without a ring on her finger. He held up my hand gently, my wedding band clearly visible, and added, "She was never alone. She was just invisible to you." Hush. Then the administrator took a breath. "You're right. We failed her. And we'll make it right." I didn't trust her words. Not yet. But I saw something in her eyes. Not pity. Not performative regret. Just discomfort. The kind that comes when a mirror's held up to your face and you see what others have always seen. She turned to a nearby nurse. "Get a wheelchair. Now." They rushed me to an exam room after that. Urgent, apologetic, like suddenly realizing I was a human being. Machines were wheeled in. A sonographer was paged. Nurses took vitals like their lives depended on it. Marcus stayed beside me, one hand on my shoulder, the other near his holster. Not threatening, just present, just protective. The ultrasound came back okay, thank God. The baby was healthy. The pain, it turned out, had come from a rare uterine spasm. Not life-threatening if caught early, but dangerous if ignored. Left untreated any longer, they told me, and things could have gone very differently. I felt the weight of those words. Ignored, dismissed, dehumanized. All because I didn't look like someone worth saving. The nurse who delivered the update looked embarrassed. She didn't meet my eyes when she said the words. And I didn't offer her comfort. Not this time. That wasn't my job. Later, as I rested in the room with Marcus seated beside me, I whispered, "What if you hadn't come?" He turned to me, eyes tired. "Don't go there." "But it's the truth." He looked at me for a long moment, then leaned in close. "I would have burned this place to the ground before letting them hurt you," he said quietly. "And they know it now." We sat in silence after that. Me, staring at the monitor where my baby's heartbeat fluttered like soft wings. Him, watching the door like a soldier in enemy territory. There was no satisfaction in what happened. No triumphant music or closing credits. Just the bitter truth that even with an FBI badge, even with power and proof, we'd barely scraped by. All because of bias. But something had shifted. Because the next morning, the hospital issued a public statement. And this time they used my name. They called me Mrs. Naomi Evans. They addressed me as a patient. They acknowledged the incident, cited federal review, and announced that Dr. Monroe had been placed on indefinite leave pending investigation. Didn't fix everything, but it was a start. A start I didn't have to scream for. A start earned by dignity, by strength, by truth walking through the door when it was least expected. The next few days moved like a haze. I wish I could say I got rest after that night. After the humiliation, the confrontation, the reveal. But rest doesn't come easy when your body might be stable, but your spirit is still reeling. Marcus stayed home with me, trading briefings and case files for diapers and prenatal vitamins. But I knew it wasn't just out of concern for the pregnancy. It was something deeper, something silent. That night had shaken us both. We didn't talk much about what happened at first. Not the slurs, not the looks, not the way that doctor's voice still echoed in my ears. Society's burden. I tried to shake it off. I told myself the baby was fine. I told myself justice had been served. But trauma doesn't leave with a discharge form. It lingers. It waits until you're alone in the kitchen pouring a glass of water, and your hands start trembling for no reason. It waits until you wake up at 3 a.m. sweating, hearing footsteps that aren't there, voices that weren't yours. And so I did what black women do far too often. I swallowed it. I wrapped it in politeness and thank yous to nurses who came to check on me. I smiled at the flowers the hospital kept sending. Orchids, roses, lilies. A garden of guilt blooming in my living room. But Marcus saw through it. Of course he did. He watched me trace the bruises on my arm where the 4 went in too rough. He noticed how I flinched when I saw white coats on TV. And one morning, as he placed a mug of tea in front of me, he said quietly, "You don't have to carry this alone." "I'm fine," I replied too quickly, staring into the cup. "No, you're not." I looked up, and his face was soft, tired, but unwavering. You keep saying you're okay like that word will erase what happened. But I was there. I saw them ignore you, disrespect you, endanger you. And I need you to know, none of that was your fault. The dam cracked. I lowered the mug, pressed both hands to my swollen belly, and whispered, "What if our child has to go through this too?" That's when he sat beside me, pulled me in, and said something I'll never forget. "They won't. Not if I have anything to say about it. Not if we do what we were born to do. Shine in places they never expected us to stand." That's the thing about Marcus. He's not just a man of action. He's a man of transformation. He doesn't just react to pain. He builds from it. And he wasn't finished building. 2 days later we received a letter. Stamp. Official. From the Office of the Inspector General. It was a formal request for an interview. Apparently, the incident had been flagged for a Department of Justice civil rights review, and Marcus's presence at the hospital that night had set off more alarms than anyone expected. The letter explained that multiple complaints had been filed in recent years about St. Calhoun Memorial's treatment of patients of color. Some anonymous, some buried, some, disturbingly, retracted after threats of lawsuits. But ours had gone viral. Somebody had recorded Marcus's confrontation with Dr. Monroe, and someone else had leaked it. By the time we opened the letter, the video already had over 2 million views. I didn't know how to feel. Suppose. Vindicated. Afraid. Empowered. There I was, sweating, crying, clutching my belly in that ER lobby, streaming on every platform. And Marcus, standing tall, delivering truth like a verdict. The internet was split, of course. Some praised him, called him a hero, called me brave. Others, predictably, accused us of exploiting the system. She's faking it. He pulled rank. Another black sob story. But the truth doesn't need unanimous votes. Just needs oxygen. And now it had plenty. When we met with the DOJ investigators, they listened. Not just nodded politely, but really listened. They asked detailed questions about the sequence of events, the hospital staff, the prior reactions I received, even how I'd been treated at triage. Marcus brought records, photos, audio of his calls, and I brought my pain. I told them everything. From the nurse's narrowed eyes to the moment Dr. Monroe said we weren't a charity. From the burning in my back to the burn in my chest when the lobby laughed at me. And when I finished, the silence in the room wasn't dismissive. It was heavy, respectful. One of the women, a young black legal analyst, had tears in her eyes. "We've seen this before," she said quietly. "But we've never had it so clearly documented." "Thank you." I nodded, unsure how to respond. After the interview, Marcus squeezed my hand in the elevator. "We did something," he said. "Yeah," I whispered. "But I don't want this to be the end." He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" I took a breath, chest rising slowly. "I want to testify. If this goes further, if it becomes a hearing or an inquiry, or even just a closed review, I want them to hear my voice." He stared at me, then smiled. "You sure? I'm tired of being invisible." And so it began. I wasn't just the patient anymore. I became the witness. They called it a pattern of practice investigation, a full probe into racial disparities at the hospital. St. Calhoun's legal team tried to deny it, claimed the doctor had acted independently, and without authorization. But with the video, with the records, with Marcus's status, they had no ground to stand on. Meanwhile, the media storm brewed louder. News anchors began dissecting the story. Civil rights lawyers reached out. Hospitals around the country began issuing equity protocols overnight, clearly afraid of becoming the next headline. And through it all, I kept thinking of that moment. That moment I almost collapsed on the ER floor, unseen, unheard. And how close injustice came to killing something I hadn't even birthed yet. But that's the thing about injustice. It doesn't win unless we stop telling the story. So I kept telling it. Everywhere. To lawmakers. To students. To nurses in training. I spoke not just for myself, but for every black woman misdiagnosed. every ignored heartbeat, every dismissed cry for help. And the world started listening. St. Calhoun issued another statement, this one more desperate. They announced comprehensive diversity retraining. They created a task force. But none of that erased the past. And it didn't erase what was coming. Because the DOJ had issued a subpoena. Dr. Monroe was about to testify. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm cloud. Not sudden but heavy, looming over everything, stretching shadows across every hour leading up to it. By then, the story had become more than just ours. It was a headline, a case study, a social media wildfire. News vans lined the streets outside the Department of Justice building. Protesters gathered with signs reading Black Mothers Matter and Healthcare, Not Hate. I wore a simple black maternity dress that morning. Nothing fancy, just something that felt strong, comfortable. My hands kept trembling as I smoothed the fabric over my belly. Marcus noticed and gently caught my wrist. You don't have to be perfect, he said softly. You just have to be real. That's why they'll listen. I nodded, but the truth was, I wasn't nervous about the questions. I was nervous about seeing Dr. Monroe again. I hadn't seen him since that night. Since Marcus walked into that ER lobby and flipped the entire power dynamic on its head. But now, I'd have to face him under oath. I'd have to hear his voice again. That same voice that called me a burden. When we walked into the building, the press swarmed. Questions flew at us like darts. Mrs. Evans, do you believe this was a systemic issue? Special Agent Evans, are you using your federal position to influence the investigation? Will you be pursuing legal action? Marcus kept his hand firmly on my back, guiding me through the chaos without a single word to the cameras. He didn't need to speak. His presence was enough. People parted like waves. Inside the hearing room, the air was tense, thick with expectation. It wasn't a courtroom, but it had the same gravity. Long wooden tables, rows of officials, microphones waiting to capture every syllable. Dr. Monroe sat on the other side of the room. He looked different now. Smaller somehow, even though his posture was stiff. His once pristine white coat was replaced by a dark suit, and he kept fiddling with his cufflinks like a man who wished he could disappear. When they called my name, I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room. I walked to the witness table, heart pounding, and placed my hand on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. The questions started simple, timeline, details, symptoms. I answered each one carefully, but I refused to soften the truth. When they asked how I was treated upon arrival, I looked directly at Dr. Monroe and said, like I was a problem, not a person. The room shifted with murmurs. One of the officials leaned forward. Mrs. Evans, did Dr. Monroe make any specific remarks you found discriminatory or dismissive? I took a slow breath. Yes. He called people like me a burden to society. He told me this hospital wasn't a charity. Dr. Monroe shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't stop. I was 8 months pregnant. I was in pain. And instead of care, I received contempt. Instead of being seen as a mother-to-be, I was treated like I didn't belong there, like I was wasting their time. When I finished speaking, the silence was suffocating. Thank you, Mrs. Evans, the lead investigator said finally. You may step down. I walked back to my seat next to Marcus, my legs trembling. He squeezed my hand. You did good, he whispered. Then it was Dr. Monroe's turn. He was sworn in, his voice low but steady at first. He talked about his years of service, his reputation, his dedication to the hospital. But when they pressed him about my accusations, cracks began to show. I never meant, he started. It was taken out of context. I was overwhelmed with patients that night and the lead investigator interrupted. So you deny calling her a burden to society? His jaw tightened. I may have said something that could have been misinterpreted. But it wasn't personal. Marcus stood before I even realized he'd moved. He wasn't supposed to speak. It wasn't his testimony. but his presence alone demanded the floor. "With all due respect," he said, voice calm but cutting, "when you look a black woman in the eye while she's clutching her stomach in pain and call her a burden, that's not a misunderstanding. That's who you are." The room went still. Dr. Monroe's eyes darted toward Marcus, and I saw the fear there. Not just of Marcus's badge, but of what the world now knew about him. His carefully polished career was unraveling. One official leaned in. "Dr. Monroe, you're under oath. Did you or did you not use those words?" Dr. Monroe swallowed. I did. But no further explanation. The official cut in. The record speaks for itself. The rest of the hearing felt like a blur. Questions, answers, legal jargon. But I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. When the session ended, Marcus and I walked out hand in hand. Cameras were waiting again, but this time I didn't hide behind him. Faced them. "Do you have a statement, Mrs. Evans?" A reporter called out. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want every woman, every black woman who's been ignored or dismissed, to know this. You are not a burden. You are not invisible. And when you speak, you deserve to be heard." The crowd erupted with questions, but Marcus guided me toward the car. His expression unreadable. In the quiet of the ride home, I finally exhaled. "That was only the beginning," he said after a long silence. "What do you mean?" "The DOJ is opening a full investigation into St. Calhoun. And they want you to give a public testimony at the state hearing next month." I turned to him, stunned. "A state hearing?" He nodded. "They're not letting this slide. And neither should we." For a long moment I didn't say anything. Then I placed my hand over my belly and whispered, "If I do this, I do it for her. For our daughter." Marcus smiled faintly, resting his hand over mine. "Then we'll do it together." As the car rolled down the quiet streets, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. Not borrowed power from Marcus's badge, but my own. My voice, my truth, my story. But I also knew this wasn't over. The hospital had money, influence, lawyers who would stop at nothing to protect their name. And somewhere out there, Dr. Monroe was plotting his next move. I thought that after the federal hearing, after speaking my truth under oath and watching Dr. Monroe squirm in front of an entire panel, things would quiet down. I was wrong. Within a week, subpoenas started flying like confetti. St. Calhoun's internal records were seized. Patient reports, complaint files, HR emails. Nothing was off limits now. What had started as a single act of discrimination against me had cracked open a vault of systemic rot. And I was standing in the middle of it. The media attention never let up. Every morning I'd wake up to new headlines. Hospital under siege after FBI agent's wife exposes racial neglect. Doctor who called black pregnant woman a burden faces career collapse. Marcus Evans's wife to testify in landmark civil rights case. It was surreal seeing my name everywhere, especially when just weeks ago I'd been invisible in that waiting room. But visibility came with a cost. People started digging. Old classmates messaged me. Strangers sent mail. Some encouraging, some cruel. One letter read, "Enjoy your 15 minutes, race baiter." Another said, "I hope your baby survives, unlike the hospital's reputation." Marcus read that one before I could. He didn't speak. He just stared at the paper, then calmly fed it into the shredder. I knew he was holding back. The part of him trained to stay cool under pressure was at war with a man who wanted to tear the world apart for me. But that's not who he was, not anymore. We were parents now, or about to be. And I was scheduled to testify, this time before a state-level medical ethics board, composed of both medical and legal professionals. The stakes were higher, the consequences broader. This wasn't just about Dr. Monroe anymore. This was about every other doctor like him, every hospital that quietly allowed this culture to thrive. But days before the hearing, something unexpected happened. A knock came at our door. Marcus looked through the peephole, then opened it with caution. Standing there, in a navy coat and rain-speckled shoes, was a black woman in her mid-30s. Her eyes were tired. Her hair pulled back in a bun that had seen too many long shifts. She looked up at me. "Are you Naomi Evans?" I nodded slowly. "My name is Layla McGill," she said. "I was a nurse at St. Calhoun for 8 years." I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I saw the hearing," she said, sitting at our kitchen table. "I saw everything. And I'm here because I couldn't stay silent anymore." Marcus poured her tea while I sat across from her, unsure where this was going. "I worked under Dr. Monroe," she continued. "He's been doing this for years. Not just to patients, nurses too. Especially nurses of color. He created a culture where we were too scared to speak. And the hospital protected him. Every time." Her hands were shaking slightly. I reached out and steadied them. "I believe you," I said. She nodded, swallowing a hard lump in her throat. "I want to testify with you," she said. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The next few days moved like clockwork. Layla met with the DOJ team. She submitted internal emails, documentation, even voice recordings of staff mocking black patients behind closed doors. It was horrifying. But it was validation. The night before the state hearing, I couldn't sleep. Marcus stayed up with me, reading through every page of my statement, helping me polish each line. "Don't hold back," he said. "Don't let them dilute it." "I won't. You're not just telling your story anymore," he said, eyes locked with mine. "You're telling hers. And hers. And every other woman who never got to walk out of that hospital." The morning came fast. Layla and I walked in together. Two women who had once been silenced by a white coat, now armed with truth and standing tall. The hearing room was larger than the last. Brighter. Packed with observers, officials, lawyers, even representatives from the governor's office. This wasn't just about discipline. This could lead to new state policy. Medical licensing reform. Nationwide precedent. I sat beside Layla, waiting to be called. And then they summoned Dr. Monroe first. He walked in like a man on his way to execution. His legal team had trimmed him into something softer. Gray suit, pale tie, glasses to make him look academic. But the arrogance, still there. Subdued, but visible in the way he gripped the microphone. He gave a prepared statement. Talked about stress, resource constraints, his years of service. Then came the line that nearly made me laugh. "I've always treated my patients with dignity and impartiality." A murmur spread through the room. Layla leaned toward me and whispered, "Liar." Then it was my turn. The moderator announced me with formal weight. "Naomi Evans, civil witness and complainant in case #312B. I stood slowly, walked forward with Layla at my side. We had requested to testify together. They granted it. 2 microphones, 2 chairs, 1 truth. I started. "I'm here today not because I want revenge, but because I want change. On the night I was admitted to St. Calhoun, I was 8 months pregnant and in pain. I needed help. Instead I was met with bias, with suspicion, with cruelty dressed in a lab coat." Layla spoke next. "I saw the way they treated her. I've seen it before. I've lived it. We were told to ignore it, to prioritize the hospital's reputation. But at what cost? Our dignity, our patients' safety. We alternated, like a duet of defiance. Every word we spoke chipped away at the myth of medical neutrality. And then I said the line that shifted the air in the room. Dr. Monroe didn't just see a patient that night. He saw a stereotype, and he treated me accordingly. But what he didn't see, what he never bothered to ask, was that I am also the wife of a federal agent, a woman with a name, a voice, a future, and a daughter who will never grow up thinking silence is survival. When we finished, the room was silent. Not out of discomfort, out of respect. The panel nodded. The moderator thanked us. One of the lawyers, an older man with silver hair, stood to shake our hands. "You've done more today than you realize," he said quietly. "You've changed the conversation." Outside, the press swarmed again. But this time, the headline wasn't about scandal. It was about a shift. 2 black women take down a medical giant and change the system. That night, as I sat by the window, hand over my belly, I felt a kick. Strong. Sharp. Timed perfectly with the memory of that final line. And I smiled. She had heard everything. You'd think that exposing a powerful hospital and watching a man like Dr. Monroe fumble under pressure would feel like victory. And for a while it did. But power doesn't fade quietly. Especially when it's been unchecked for decades. A week after our testimony, I got a call from a private number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another came the next day, and another the day after that. Finally, on the 4th call, I answered. There was silence at first. Then a voice I hadn't expected to hear ever again. Dr. Monroe. Mrs. Evans, he began, his tone low, calculated. I think it's in both our best interests to end this quietly. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. He went on. You've made your point. The media has had their moment. But you and I both know this kind of attention isn't permanent. Eventually, they'll move on. And you'll still have to live in this city. Raise your child in this system. It would be wise to protect your name before this turns ugly. I felt my pulse slow, not speed up. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. He thought I was still that woman in the lobby. Alone. Powerless. He still didn't understand. I'm recording this call, I said calmly. You're threatening a federal witness during an active civil rights investigation. There was a beat of silence on his end. Then a shaky exhale. I didn't mean it as a threat. Just perspective. You gave me perspective the night you called me a burden. I don't need more. Hung up. My hands weren't shaking. I sent the audio to Marcus. He was silent for a moment after listening, then said, Let's elevate this. 2 days later, that recording was in the hands of the DOJ. What Monroe didn't realize was that every attempt to intimidate me only strengthened the case. His arrogance was no longer just medical malpractice. It was obstruction, witness intimidation, retaliation, and now it was federal. From there, the investigation escalated fast. Agents re-examined old cases, pulled back the curtains on dozens of complaints that had been dismissed by St. Calhoun's Internal Review Board. Patterns emerged, particularly among black women who had reported being misdiagnosed, ignored, or belittled. One case stood out. A 24-year-old woman named Brianna had died during childbirth 2 years prior at the same hospital. Her chart showed elevated blood pressure and severe abdominal pain, signs of preeclampsia, but the response was delayed for hours. The attending physician, Dr. Monroe, and the lead nurse on shift that night, Layla McGill. We sat down with her again, this time in our living room. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. But her eyes were full of something harder than grief, regret. I tried to advocate for Brianna, she said. I did. But when I raised my concerns, Monroe shut me down. Said I was overreacting. Said the girl was exaggerating. Did you report it? Asked gently. I did. And the hospital said I had a bias problem. I almost quit that year. But then I thought, if I leave, who's left to fight? I reached for her hand. You stayed. And because of that, we're here. The DOJ reopened Brianna's case. And suddenly, our fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every name they'd buried under bureaucracy. The state launched a public inquiry. Journalists uncovered internal documents showing that Monroe had been investigated multiple times, but every complaint had been resolved internally, with no disciplinary action. Most were from black women, all dismissed as unsubstantiated. But now they were substantiated, thoroughly, publicly. And Dr. Monroe, he had vanished from public view. His house was dark, his social media wiped. Rumors swirled that he'd fled the state. But the DOJ had issued a formal subpoena. If he didn't show up to the next hearing, he'd be held in contempt. Meanwhile, the hospital board called a press conference. It was damage control but also desperation. The president of St. Calhoun stood in front of flashing cameras and said all the expected things. We are committed to equity. We regret any harm. We are implementing changes. But it was too late. You can't spin justice. Not when truth is on tape. Not when too many voices have been silenced for too long. The same week as the press conference, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was handwritten. From Brianna's mother. It read, I watched you on that stand. You said what I never had the chance to. You made them hear her name. Oh baby, thank you. For giving her back to me. I held the letter against my chest and wept. That night, Marcus found me in the nursery, folding baby clothes with shaking hands. You okay? He asked. He nodded. I just realized. This isn't about what happened to me anymore. This is about what I'm doing with it. He kissed my forehead. Then you're doing everything right. But the next morning the story took another turn. A staff whistleblower leaked something explosive to the press. St. Calhoun Memorial had received a private donation of $2.5 million from a pharmaceutical lobbying group on the condition that Dr. Monroe remain head of diagnostics for at least 5 years. It was all there, in emails, contracts, payment receipts. The hospital had protected him for profit. And now, that deal was public. Protests erupted. Medical students staged walkouts. Patients canceled appointments en masse. The governor announced a full review of state-funded contracts with the hospital. And as for me, I was invited to speak before the state legislature. They wanted to hear from the woman who lit the match. The night before my appearance, I stood before a mirror, adjusting my blouse, placing my hands on my belly. 1.5 months now. Still standing. Still fighting. And more visible than ever. I looked into my own eyes and said aloud, You are not a burden. You are a blueprint. Because this fight was never just about one hospital, or one man in a white coat. It was about every institution that thought we were too tired, too scared, too unheard to fight back. They were wrong. The chamber was packed. Every seat taken. Cameras lined the back wall. Legislative aides whispered behind clipboards. And state officials adjusted their microphones with a kind of practiced stiffness that only comes with power. But even they looked uneasy. Because they weren't just about to hear a testimony. They were about to witness a reckoning. I sat in the front row, hands folded over my belly, waiting for my name to be called. My nerves were calm. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I'd already lived through worse. After facing down a racist doctor in a hospital that could have cost me my child, there was nothing a room full of lawmakers could do to shake me. Then they called me Mrs. Naomi Evans, civilian witness. I stood, walked forward, slowly, proudly. The hush that followed wasn't out of politeness. It was respect. Everyone in that room knew who I was. I wasn't just the woman from the viral video anymore. I was the woman who made an empire tremble. Please raise your right hand. I swore the oath, then took my seat at the witness table. The mic picked up every breath, every rustle of paper. A committee member, a white man in his 50s with kind eyes and a southern accent, leaned forward. Mrs. Evans, thank you for being here. We know this hasn't been easy. I met his gaze. Thank you for listening. He nodded. You may begin. I inhaled. My name is Naomi Evans. I'm a wife, daughter, a soon-to-be mother. And I'm here today because 2 months ago I was humiliated, dismissed, and nearly endangered while seeking emergency medical care. Not because I was aggressive, not because I was uncooperative, but because I was black. No one moved. I entered St. Calhoun Memorial Hospital in intense pain. 8 months pregnant. My symptoms were ignored. My voice was silenced. And my humanity was stripped away by a man with credentials but no conscience. Pause. Then looked each committee member directly in the eye. And I wasn't the first. I told them about the patterns, the complaints, the erased records, the culture of indifference. I told them about Brianna, about Layla, about the moment my husband walked into that ER with his badge and made them all remember that I wasn't disposable. Then I added, but here's the thing, justice shouldn't require a badge. It shouldn't take a federal agent for a black woman to receive basic human care. That line hit like thunder. Even the aides stopped writing. Continued. We have rules in place, policies meant to prevent discrimination. But they mean nothing without accountability. What happened to me, and to women like me, is not the result of a few bad actors. It's the result of systems that refuse to see us. At that point my voice cracked slightly. I reached down, instinctively rubbing my stomach. The baby kicked gently like she knew. I looked back up. This isn't just about malpractice. It's about malpractice of justice. And I'm asking this body, this state, to do better. Because if not now, when? There was a silence afterward that stretched longer than most speakers were afforded. Then the chairman leaned forward. Mrs. Evans, what reforms would you propose? I didn't hesitate. Mandatory racial bias training with real, measurable outcomes. Not just videos and handouts. An independent state-level body to review discrimination claims in hospitals. Real penalties for retaliation against whistleblowers. And a hotline where patients, especially marginalized ones, can report mistreatment without fear. One of the younger legislators, a Latina woman in a navy pantsuit, nodded vigorously. That's a strong framework. Would you be willing to consult on drafting the bill? Blinked. You want my help, writing the law? You're the reason we're all sitting here, she said plainly. You're not just a witness. You're a catalyst. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Yes, I'd be honored. Later outside the building, Marcus met me at the steps. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. But I didn't flinch. I walked right past them into his arms. You did it, he whispered. No, I replied. We did. But the fight wasn't over. That night, as we sat together on the couch, Layla texted me. Check the news. Now. I grabbed the remote and flipped to the local broadcast. And there it was. Breaking news. Dr. Monroe arrested for witness tampering and obstruction in federal civil rights case. Marcus leaned forward, stunned. They actually moved on it. The anchor continued. Sources confirm the former physician was taken into custody earlier today after a series of threatening messages and recorded calls surfaced, showing attempts to intimidate key witnesses in the ongoing investigation into St. Calhoun Memorial Hospital. The footage showed Monroe being led in handcuffs out of a home in North Carolina. Hair disheveled. Sunken. The empire had finally fallen. And the next morning, as if the universe had been waiting for the moment, my water broke. We rushed to a different hospital, one with a reputation for ethical treatment, for diversity, for dignity. Marcus drove like a man on a mission, calling ahead as we flew down the freeway. And when we arrived, I was met with nothing but care. Immediate attention. They didn't ask about my income. They didn't raise eyebrows at my last name. They just treated me like I mattered. And 6 hours later, I held my daughter in my arms. She had a full head of dark curls, a scowl like her father's, and lungs that demanded to be heard. Wept. Not because of the pain. Not because of the exhaustion. But because I'd done it. Had survived. I had fought. I had delivered more than a child. I had delivered change. And as Marcus leaned over, placing a kiss on my forehead and then on hers, he whispered, You made her world safer. I looked at him, tired but unwavering. No, I said. We made it stronger. The days that followed her birth blurred together like sunlight through gauze. Sleepless nights, soft cries, lullabies whispered through cracked lips. But through the exhaustion, I felt something deeper than fatigue. Something ancient, electric, and fierce. Motherhood. I had carried her through protest and pain. Through humiliation and justice. Through courtrooms, hearings, and the glare of a nation's spotlight. And now here she was, wrapped against my chest, eyes closed, hand curled into my shirt like she already knew where safety lived. We named her Amara, which means grace in multiple languages. Because after all the fire, we needed something soft. Something that whispered, we made it. Marcus was glued to us in those first days. He'd pace the floor with her at night, sing old Sam Cooke songs in a low hum, and watch me with a reverence I hadn't seen since our wedding. But even in that quiet bubble of new life, the world didn't stop moving. And neither did the movement. The video of my testimony before the state legislature had gone viral, again. But this time it wasn't just outrage fueling the shares. It was hope. Women wrote to me from everywhere. Doctors, nurses, patients, even medical students. "I'm finishing med school because of you. I filed a complaint against my attending today. Because of you, I didn't stay silent. I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm not." A group of black women OBGYNs even launched a new organization, the Amara Foundation, named after my daughter. Their mission was simple: eliminate maternal health disparities for black women across the country. They asked me to join their board. Said yes. And then, 2 weeks after Amara's birth, I got a call I never expected. It was from the governor's office. His aide was polite but firm. "The governor would like to meet with you personally, to discuss a new healthcare initiative, and to apologize face to face." I didn't respond right away. Marcus raised an eyebrow from across the room. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, still holding the phone. "I just got invited to the Capitol." The governor's office was stark and elegant. Mahogany panels, oil paintings, the kind of silence that made you sit up straighter. Marcus waited outside with Amara while I was ushered in. The governor stood when I entered. A tall man with weary eyes and a reputation for staying out of the fray until it was politically safe. He extended a hand. "Mrs. Evans. It's an honor." I shook it but said nothing. He motioned for me to sit. "I've been following your case. What you did, it moved people. Moved me." Again I said nothing. Let him feel the silence. Finally he cleared his throat. "I want to do more than say sorry. I want your input on a new bill, the Patient Equity and Accountability Act. Mandatory reporting of racial bias incidents in hospitals. Anonymous patient hotlines. Penalties for repeat offenders. I want it named after you." I blinked. "After me?" He nodded. "The Naomi Evans Act." I should have felt honored. But instead I asked, "Are you doing this for the cameras?" He looked stunned for a moment. Then he smiled, tired but honest. "No. I'm doing this because I have a daughter. And if she ever ends up in a hospital like you did, I want her to be safe." That landed. I nodded slowly. "Then let's make it happen." The press conference announcing the bill was held on the Capitol steps. Cameras flashed. Reporters jostled for position. Marcus stood beside me in a charcoal blazer, holding Amara swaddled in a golden wrap. The governor took the mic first. "Today we take the first step in fixing what's been broken far too long. And we owe it to one woman's courage to get here." He gestured to me. I stepped forward, heart steady. "This isn't just a law. It's a promise that the next black woman who walks into a hospital won't have to wonder if she'll be seen, or heard, or helped. It's a line in the sand. And today, we draw it." The crowd erupted. Later back home, as Amara slept between us, I whispered, "I wish my mother could see this." Marcus reached for my hand. "She'd be proud. You've changed the world." I thought about that for a long moment. Then I whispered, "But what happens when the headlines fade? When the noise quiets?" He looked at me. "Then we keep working. Quiet doesn't mean it's over. It means we get to rebuild." That night, I wrote a letter I never intended to send. To Dr. Monroe. "You tried to make me feel small. You tried to reduce me to a statistic, a stereotype, a whisper. But what you didn't know is that I've never been a whisper. I've always been a storm. And because of what you did, because of what you tried to take from me, hundreds of women will be safer. You tried to erase me. But now my name is the law." Folded it. Tucked it away. Not for him. For me. Because the story wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about purpose. And I was living it. Weeks passed. Marcus returned to work, coordinating a new civil rights task force for the Bureau. I joined the Amara Foundation full-time, working to launch advocacy programs, maternal care clinics, and national training standards. And through it all, Amara grew, smiling, babbling, holding my finger with a grip stronger than I thought possible. One day, as I fed her in the morning light, I realized something. I used to think survival was the goal. But now I knew it was legacy. Not just making it through, but leaving something behind that said, I was here. Mattered. I made it better. And just as I finished burping her, my phone buzzed. A message from Layla. You watching the news? I turned on the TV. The anchor spoke with urgency. Breaking. Federal class action filed against St. Calhoun Memorial. 57 women come forward alleging medical discrimination. Froze. The reporter continued. The case, inspired by the testimony of Naomi Evans, could become the largest civil rights lawsuit in medical history. The DOJ is also considering broad policy changes based on the findings. 57 women. 57 voices. One match. One flame. One movement. And I had lit it. The day I walked into the courtroom for the class action trial, I wasn't alone. Behind me stood 57 women. Mothers, sisters, nurses, daughters. Each one had their own story of pain, of neglect, of being dismissed, ignored, or humiliated in a place that was supposed to heal them. Some of them had nearly died. Some had lost children. And some, like Brianna, hadn't survived at all. Their photos sat on easels at the front of the courtroom. Not for sympathy, for remembrance. We weren't asking for pity. We were demanding accountability. The lawsuit, filed against St. Calhoun Memorial Hospital, named not only Dr. Monroe but also the board of directors, former HR personnel, and key department heads who had signed off on the cover-ups. The charges ranged from civil rights violations to negligence, and even gross misconduct. And I had been asked to testify again, not as a victim, this time as a lead plaintiff. As I took the stand, I noticed the courtroom was packed to capacity. Journalists lined the back wall. Some women clutched tissues. Others held hands. The judge, a black woman in her 60s, watched me over her glasses with a gaze so sharp it felt like truth itself. The opposing counsel, stiff and well-paid, started with formality. Mrs. Evans, you've become the central voice in this case. Do you believe your experience was unique or? It wasn't unique, I said clearly. That's the point. He blinked. Excuse me. I looked around the room. It wasn't unique. What happened to me has happened to women of color across this country for generations. The only difference is, someone filmed it this time. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The attorney straightened. Would you say that the hospital's actions were part of a larger, intentional effort to discriminate? I'd say that when you see the same pattern play out over and over again, with the same victims, the same excuses, and the same silence, it's no longer a coincidence. It's a culture. He flinched at that word. Culture. Because culture doesn't go away with one fired doctor. Has to be dismantled. Brick by brick. Continued. When I was left in that ER lobby, 8 months pregnant and in pain, it wasn't because the hospital was full. It wasn't because I was hostile. It was because they saw a black woman and assumed she was exaggerating, looking for a handout, taking up space she hadn't earned. Pause. Let the words hang. And yet I wasn't a statistic. I was the wife of a federal agent. I had a voice, a badge, and now, a platform. I looked directly at the defense table. But most women don't. Then I said the name that still haunted the silence. Brianna Jameson didn't. I turned to the judge. She died because no one listened. Because the staff assumed she was being dramatic. Because they ignored her vital signs until it was too late. This lawsuit isn't just about me. It's about Brianna. It's about every name on those easels. And it's about making sure this stops. Not after another funeral. I stepped down, my legs steady, my voice stronger than it had ever been. One by one, other women took the stand. Some read letters they'd written but never had the chance to send. Others shared testimonies they'd kept buried for years. Layla spoke too. She described the culture inside the hospital, the retaliation she'd faced, the fear she lived with every time she clocked in. And when she finished, the gallery stood and applauded. Even the judge didn't silence them, because sometimes the truth demands noise. The trial lasted 10 days. Each one brought new revelations. Emails showing deliberate suppression of complaints, staff who'd been threatened with termination if they spoke out, documents proving that racial disparity training had been cut from the hospital's budget 3 years prior to save money. And then the verdict came. Liable. On all counts. The hospital was ordered to pay $112 million in damages, to be distributed among the plaintiffs. But more importantly, the ruling set precedent, national precedent, for how civil rights violations in medical settings could be tried and punished. When the judge read the decision, I didn't cry. I stood, holding Amara in my arms, and nodded once. Justice had spoken. In the months that followed, the Naomi Evans Act passed unanimously through the state legislature and was adopted by 2 other states before the end of the year. Hospitals across the country began implementing mandatory bias training, real training with measurable outcomes. Layla was offered a position as Director of Equity and Inclusion at a leading hospital in Chicago. She accepted. Brianna's mother joined the Amara Foundation as a maternal care advocate, helping build clinics in underserved areas. Marcus was promoted to lead a new civil rights enforcement division at the Bureau, overseeing racial discrimination cases in federal institutions. And me. Kept speaking. Universities. Healthcare conferences. Police precincts. Because injustice doesn't stay in one building. Seeps. And silence helps it grow. But now there was a voice following it. My voice. One day a journalist asked me, "What do you want your daughter to know about all of this?" I looked down at Amara, now sitting up on her own, giggling at her own reflection. Smiled. I want her to know that her mother didn't let pain define her. She used it. She turned humiliation into power. And she made the world just a little bit safer for the next black woman who walks into a room and refuses to shrink. The journalist nodded. And do you think the fight is over? I looked into the camera. No, but it's louder now. And we're not backing down. And so, this is where my story finds its breath. Not in tragedy, not in revenge, but in a courtroom where power had to listen. In a nursery where laughter now lives. In the hands of every woman who finally said, "Me too." Not to shame but to strength. Because once I was called a burden. Now, my name is the law.